April 18, 1942. 4:20 a.m. North Pacific Ocean, approximately 650 nautical miles east of the Japanese mainland. The sea is dark, restless, and metallic under a moonless sky. Long, slow swells roll beneath a steel city at war, the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, her deck slick with salt spray, her hull creaking as it cuts through cold Pacific water. The air smells of fuel, oil, and the sharp bite of wind sweeping down from the Aleutians. Somewhere deep inside the ship, engines throb with a steady, mechanical heartbeat. On the flight deck, silhouettes move carefully, deliberately. Men speak in whispers. Boots scrape against steel. Canvas jackets snap in the wind. Faces are tight, hollow-eyed, framed by helmets and goggles pulled low against the cold. These men are far from any friendly shore, farther than American bombers have ever dared to be. Above them, lashed tightly to the deck, sit 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, twin-engine medium bombers never designed to fly from aircraft carriers. Their wings stretch awkwardly across the deck, propellers motionless, bomb bay doors sealed. Each aircraft is packed to its limits with fuel tanks, explosives, ammunition, and hope. This is not a normal mission. This is not a normal war. This is the opening act of an operation that was never supposed to be possible. The shadow of Pearl Harbor. 4 months earlier, on December 7, 1941, the Pacific War erupted in fire and smoke. Japanese carrier aircraft had descended upon Pearl Harbor like a storm, sinking battleships, killing thousands, and shattering the illusion of American invulnerability. Across the Pacific, the Japanese Empire surged forward. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, Wake Island, the Dutch East Indies, each falling in rapid succession. By early 1942, Japan's defensive perimeter stretched thousands of miles across ocean and jungle. Tokyo stood untouched, unbombed, untested. To the Japanese public, the emperor's realm seemed invincible. To American leadership, the situation was dire. Morale in the United States was fragile. The Navy had lost battleships. The Army Air Forces had lost bases. The public demanded a response, something, anything, to prove that the war had not already been lost. President Franklin D. Roosevelt needed a strike. The military needed inspiration. The enemy needed to be reminded that distance alone could not guarantee safety. But there was a problem. Japan was too far away. No American bomber had the range to strike Tokyo and return safely. Land bases were non-existent. Carriers could launch fighters, but not heavy bombers. Until someone suggested doing the impossible. The idea that shouldn't have worked. In January 1942, within the quiet halls of military planning rooms in Washington, a radical idea began circulating. Launch Army bombers from a Navy aircraft carrier, strike the Japanese homeland, and continue westward to land in China. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It bordered on suicidal. The man chosen to make it work was Lieutenant Colonel James Harold Jimmy Doolittle, a test pilot, aeronautical engineer, and veteran aviator with ice-cold nerves and a mind built for precision. Doolittle understood the odds. He also understood the stakes. 16 bombers, 80 men, no fighter escort, no guaranteed landing fields, and no margin for error. If discovered early, the mission would fail before it began. If weather turned, men would die. If Japan retaliated, the consequences could be catastrophic. And yet, every volunteer stepped forward without hesitation. Training in shadows. In February 1942, at Eglin Field, Florida, crews trained in secrecy. B-25s practiced short takeoffs, engines screaming as pilots hauled heavy bombers into the air using barely 500 feet of runway. Bombardiers learned low-level attack techniques, flying just above rooftops and waves. Gunners practiced firing without tail guns, removed to save weight, replaced with painted broomsticks to deceive enemy fighters. Maps were kept hidden. Destinations were unspoken. Families were told nothing. The men trained knowing only one truth. This mission was one way until proven otherwise. The long approach. Now, weeks later, the task force slices through the Pacific. Task Force 16, centered on Hornet and escorted by the carrier USS Enterprise, cruisers, destroyers, and oilers. Radio silence is absolute. No lights. No signals. No mistakes. The carriers steam westward through cold, hostile waters, edging closer to Japan with every passing hour. Submarines lurk beneath the waves. Japanese patrol boats roam the seas ahead. Any contact could doom the mission. Below decks, air crews lie awake in cramped bunks, listening to the sound of water against steel. Some write letters they may never send. Others stare into nothing, replaying procedures again and again. Up on the bridge, officers study charts marked with invisible danger, enemy patrol zones, weather fronts, launch points measured down to the mile. The planned takeoff distance is already a gamble. Every extra mile from Japan means less fuel, fewer options, thinner margins. And then, suddenly, everything changes. Enemy contact. 7:38 a.m. A sharp report cuts through the stillness. A Japanese picket boat, number 23 Nito Maru, has been sighted. Binoculars rise. Orders snap across the deck. Smoke curls from the destroyer's guns as shells arc toward the small vessel. She transmits a radio warning before being sunk, seconds that may have sealed the fate of the mission. On Hornet, the realization spreads instantly. They have been spotted. Tokyo has been warned. The planned launch point, still hours away, is no longer an option. There is no debate. Jimmy Doolittle steps onto the flight deck, wind tearing at his jacket. He looks down the line of bombers, their crews already moving, faces set with grim resolve. Mechanics yank away chocks. Engines cough, then roar to life. The bombers will launch now, farther from Japan than ever intended. The margin for survival shrinks to almost nothing. A silent moment before history. As dawn breaks over the Pacific, the flight deck becomes a narrow strip of destiny. One by one, bombers inch forward, noses hanging over empty ocean. Pilots run through checklists with shaking hands. Gunners brace. Bombardiers grip their sights. There is no cheering, no speeches. Only the wind, the engines, and the knowledge that once airborne, there is no turning back. 16 aircraft. 16 crews. A nation's hope riding on aluminum wings. The signal is given. The first bomber moves forward. And the road to Tokyo opens beneath its wheels. Classified briefing tone, technical and tactical deep analysis. When historians later examined the Doolittle Raid, many concluded that its true enemy was not Japan, but physics. Distance, weight, fuel, lift. Steel versus gravity. This operation was a confrontation between engineering limits and strategic necessity, fought long before the first bomb fell on Tokyo. The aircraft that was never meant to do to this North American B-25B Mitchell medium bomber. The backbone of the raid was the B-25 Mitchell, a twin-engine medium bomber designed for conventional land-based operations, not carrier launches. Basic specifications. Crew, 5, pilot, co-pilot, navigator/bombardier, engineer/gunner, radio operator/gunner. Length, 52 feet 11 inches, 16.1 meters. Wingspan, 67 feet 7 inches, 20.6 meters. Empty weight, 19,480 lb, 8,835 kilograms. Max takeoff weight, standard 31,000 lb, 14,061 kilograms. For the Doolittle Raid, that number was pushed far beyond safe limits. Engines and power plant. Engines, 2 times Wright R 2600-9 Cyclone radial engines. Horsepower, 1,700 horsepower each. Total output, 3,400 horsepower. These engines were rugged, air-cooled, and reliable, but they drank fuel aggressively. Engineers calculated that every unnecessary pound threatened takeoff viability. To compensate, armor plating was removed. Defensive armament was reduced. Telugu. Weight savings were measured in ounces, not pounds. Fuel, the true weapon. The B-25's normal operational range was 1,300 miles. The raid required over 2,400 miles. To solve this, additional rubber bladder fuel tanks were installed in Bombay. Crawlway. Upper fuselage. Total fuel capacity increased to 1,141 gallons. This turned the aircraft into flying fuel tanks, volatile, unarmored, and dangerously overloaded. Any engine fire would have been unsurvivable. Bomb load and ammunition. Each aircraft carried 3 by 500 pounds general-purpose bombs. 1 times incendiary bomb cluster. Bombs were selected not for maximum destruction, but psychological impact. Tokyo was a city of wood and paper. Fire was the weapon. Machine guns. .50 caliber Browning M2. Rate of fire: 450-600 rounds/min. Ammunition was deliberately limited to reduce weight. 2 painted broom handles were mounted in tail positions to simulate defensive guns, a deception meant to discourage Japanese fighters from close pursuit. The carrier that launched an Army's Hornet, CV-8. A Yorktown-class aircraft carrier, but never designed for medium bombers. Specifications. Displacement: 500 tons. Length: 814 feet. Flight deck length: 770 feet. Top speed: 32 knots. Armor: minimal. Carriers relied on air defense. Launching AB-25 required. Maximum wind over deck. Carrier speed at full throttle. Aircraft positioned inches from the bow. No catapults were used. If an engine failed, the bomber went straight into the sea. Escort and Task Force defense. Task Force 16 included USS Hornet, strike platform. USS Enterprise, air cover. 4 cruisers. 8 destroyers. 2 oilers. Air Defense Doctrine. Combat Air Patrol, F-4F Wildcats. Early radar detection, CXAM radar. Anti-aircraft fire as last resort. Japanese submarines were the primary threat, not aircraft. Japanese defensive systems. Strong but CGNED Japanese early warning and radar. Japan's radar network in early 1942 was limited and fragmented. Mostly coastal visual observation posts. Few experimental radar sets. Heavy reliance on human lookouts. Radio reporting from fishing fleets. This system worked well against high-altitude bomber formations. It was poorly suited to low-altitude, single-approach attacks, small formations, surprise penetration, Japanese fighter defense. Primary interceptor, Mitsubishi A6M0. Top speed, 331 mph. Exceptional maneuverability. Light armor. No self-sealing fuel tanks. Deadly in air combat, but dependent on warning time. Most Japanese fighters were not airborne when the raid began. Doctrines ISO and American tactical philosophy. Precision navigation. Independent bomber operations. Emphasis on crew training and redundancy. Risk acceptance for strategic effect. Japanese doctrine. Forward defense perimeter. Carrier-centric offense. Expectation of decisive fleet battles. Underestimation of long-range strike creativity. The Doolittle Raid exposed a doctrinal blind spot. Japan believed the homeland was operationally unreachable. Intelligence inserts. U.S. Navy Memorandum, March 1942. Aircraft performance margins are unacceptable by peacetime standards. Mission success depends on pilot skill and favorable wind conditions. Army Air Forces Engineering Note. Removal of tail guns reduces drag and weight. Psychological deterrence may be achieved through visual deception. Japanese Coastal Watch Report, translated. Enemy presence uncertain. Weather poor. No large formations detected. Task Force 16 radio silence order. No transmissions unless fired upon. Surprise outweighs coordination. The true battlefield. This was not a battle of tanks or artillery. It was engineering versus geography, fuel versus distance, probability versus necessity. Every rivet mattered. Every gallon mattered. Every knot of wind mattered. The Doolittle Raid was not a technological superiority. It was a technological gamble, and the machines were now committed. Ahead lay Japan. Behind lay only ocean. April 18, 1942, 8:20 a.m. to nightfall. Japanese home islands/East China Sea/China interior. The first takeoff. The wind howls across the bow of the USS Hornet as if resisting what is about to happen. Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle brings his B-25 forward until its nose wheel is nearly hanging over the ocean. The carrier pitches. The deck rises and falls beneath him. Salt spray lashes the windshield. The engines are screaming now, full throttle, vibrating the cockpit so violently that gauges blur. Behind him, sailors crouch low, gripping the deck, watching in silence. No one breathes. Doolittle releases the brakes. The bomber lunges forward, racing down a deck that feels impossibly short. The end rushes toward him. For a fraction of a second, there is nothing but water ahead. Then the Mitchell drops. The aircraft sinks toward the sea, engines straining, wings flexing under impossible weight, before finally clawing its way upward, barely clearing the waves. A roar erupts from the deck. One by one, 16 bombers follow, each launch a roll of the dice. One engine sputters, recovers. Another aircraft lifts only feet above the water before stabilizing. Every man watching understands, any failure means death. By 9:19 a.m., the flight deck is empty. The Raid is airborne. Low over the waves. The bombers fly at wave-top level, no higher than 200 feet, skimming the ocean to avoid radar detection. Salt spray streaks across canopies. Navigation is done by stopwatch, compass, and dead reckoning. There are no second chances. Inside one cockpit, a navigator scribbles notes in grease pencil. Course steady. Fuel burn higher than planned. Winds unfavorable. Gunners scan the horizon, fingers numb on triggers. Radios remain silent. Hours pass. Then, land. The jagged coastline of Japan emerges through haze and cloud. Fishing villages. Roads. Rice fields. Smoke rising from chimneys. No alarms yet. The bombers split into small elements, each heading toward assigned targets. Tokyo, Yokohama, Yokosuka, Nagoya, Kobe. Tokyo. 12:30 p.m. Tokyo is alive. Streetcars rattle. Factory whistles blow. Civilians walk beneath cherry blossoms just beginning to fall. Then engines roar overhead. At first, people look up in confusion. These aircraft are not expected. Not at this altitude. Not from this direction. Doolittle's bomber surges over rooftops at barely 500 feet. Anti-aircraft guns open fire. Late, frantic, inaccurate. Black puffs burst behind the aircraft as flak crews scramble. Bomb bay doors open. The city flashes past beneath them. Warehouses, steel mills, fuel depots. Bombs fall. Explosions ripple across industrial districts. Fires ignite instantly, racing through wooden structures. Smoke billows upward, thick and black, visible for miles. A gunner fires at a Zero fighter climbing too late to intercept. Tracers streak past pagodas and radio towers. In another aircraft, a pilot shouts over the intercom. Flak at 3 o'clock. Hold course. Hold it. A shell detonates close enough to punch shrapnel through the fuselage. Metal screams. A crewman is wounded, blood pooling on the floor, but the bomber stays airborne. Within minutes, it is over. The bombers vanish back into cloud and sea haze, leaving behind confusion, flame, and disbelief. Japanese command. Shock and denial. Imperial General Headquarters, Tokyo. Maps are spread across polished tables. Red pins mark the perimeter defense. None touch the home islands. An officer rushes in, breathless. Enemy aircraft. Multiple sightings. Low altitude. Tokyo sector. Disbelief. Silence. Another report arrives. Then another. Factories hit. Fires reported. No carrier sightings. A general slams his fist on the table. Impossible. From where? Phones ring endlessly. Orders are shouted. Fighter units scramble too late. Coastal commanders demand explanations. No one has answers. The unthinkable has happened. Japan has been struck at its heart. The long escape. With fuel gauges dropping dangerously low, the bombers turn southwest toward China. Weather closes in rain, cloud, darkness. Navigation becomes guesswork. Radios crackle now, filled with fragmented transmissions. Fuel critical. Lost visual on coastline. Preparing to bail out. One by one, aircraft begin to fail. Over the East China Sea, crews jump into darkness. Parachutes blossom. Waves swallow aircraft whole. Over China, pilots push on until engines cough dry. Some crash land violently in fields and mountains. Others bail out over unknown territory. A diary entry later recovered reads, "Night, rain. Couldn't see the ground. We jumped. Didn't know if we were landing in China or hell. China. Ground war without a map. Survivors emerge bruised, burned, half-blind, carrying pistols and no supplies. They move through villages at night, guided by whispers and gestures. Chinese civilians hide them, feed them, guide them, knowing full well the cost. Japanese patrols sweep the countryside. Prisoners are taken. Some airmen disappear forever. A field report later states, casualty summary. 3 killed during bailout or crash. 8 captured by Japanese forces. Remainder evaded with Chinese assistance. The price paid by China will be enormous. Washington. The wait. In the White House, maps are updated hourly. No confirmation. No radio contact. Only silence. President Roosevelt asks a simple question. Did they reach Japan? Hours later, the answer arrives. Yes. They did. Aftermath in the enemy's mind. Militarily, the damage is limited. Psychologically, it is devastating. Japan accelerates defensive planning. Fighter units are pulled back from the Pacific. Radar development is rushed. The idea of homeland invulnerability dies in a single day. The raid directly influences a decision already forming, to destroy American carriers at Midway. The Pacific War shifts course. Final field note. Jimmy Doolittle. Believing the mission a failure due to aircraft losses, Doolittle expects court-martial. Instead, he receives the Medal of Honor. His final mission report ends with a single understated line. Mission accomplished beyond expectations. The bombers are gone. The men are scattered. But the message is clear. The war has reached Japan. And it will not stop. April 1942 and beyond. The bombs of the Doolittle Raid stopped falling within minutes. But their echoes would roll across the Pacific for years. What began as a desperate gamble, 16 aircraft launched into uncertainty, became one of the most consequential psychological operations of the Second World War. Not because of what it destroyed, but because of what it changed. The strategic shockwave. From a purely military standpoint, the damage inflicted on Japan was limited. A handful of factories were hit. Some warehouses burned. Casualties, while tragic, were small compared to later raids. Yet war is not fought only with steel and explosives. It is fought with belief. Until April 18, 1942, the Japanese homeland had been presented to its people, and to much of its leadership, as untouchable. Protected by distance, by ocean, by destiny. The Doolittle Raid shattered that illusion in a single afternoon. For the first time, Japanese civilians heard enemy engines overhead. For the first time, Japanese leaders were forced to admit vulnerability. For the first time, the war came home. Within weeks, Japan began redeploying fighter units back to the home islands, aircraft that might otherwise have contested American advances in the Pacific. Radar development accelerated. Civil defense drills expanded. The psychological cost rippled through military planning at every level. Most importantly, the raid reinforced a belief already forming inside the Imperial Navy, that the American carrier force had to be destroyed, quickly and decisively. That belief would lead directly to Midway. The road to Midway. In the months following the raid, Japanese planners concluded that as long as American carriers existed, Japan could never feel secure. The Doolittle Raid did not create the Midway operation, but it hardened its urgency. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, already advocating a decisive battle, now faced political pressure as well as strategic necessity. The result was an ambitious plan to lure American carriers into a trap near a tiny atoll in the Central Pacific. In June 1942, at Midway, that gamble would fail catastrophically. 4 Japanese carriers would be lost. Historians would later debate causality, but most agree on this point. The Doolittle Raid accelerated decisions that Japan was not prepared to survive. The cost paid in China. The raid's most tragic consequences fell far from Tokyo. As Japanese forces hunted down downed aircrews in eastern China, they unleashed brutal reprisals against villages suspected of helping Americans. Entire communities were destroyed. Tens of thousands of Chinese civilians were killed in what later became known as the Zhujiang-Jiangxi campaign. For the Doolittle raiders who survived, this knowledge became a lifelong burden. One airman would later write, "We always knew others paid the price for our survival. That knowledge never left us." The raid inspired hope, but it also deepened suffering. War rarely allows clean victories. The fate of the raiders. Of the 80 men who launched from the Hornet, 3 were killed during crashes or bailouts. 8 were captured by Japanese forces. 3 of those captives were executed. 1 died of illness in captivity. The remaining prisoners were freed at war's end. The survivors returned home as heroes, but many carried quiet scars. They spoke of fear, of exhaustion, of the moment when fuel gauges hit zero and the future vanished into darkness. Jimmy Doolittle, convinced the loss of aircraft meant failure, was stunned when he was awarded the Medal of Honor. He would go on to command major air operations in Europe, helping shape the strategic bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. Yet even in later years, when asked about the raid, he spoke not of glory, but of risk. "We accepted the odds because the moment demanded it." America's turning point. For the United States, the Doolittle Raid arrived at a moment of doubt. It proved that American forces could strike back. It proved innovation could overcome disadvantage. It proved that morale itself was a weapon. Newspapers splashed headlines across the nation. Radio broadcasts carried the news into factories, homes, and training camps. The psychological lift was immense. The raid did not win the war, but it changed how Americans believed the war could be won. Historians' verdict. Modern historians often describe the Doolittle Raid as a strategic paradox. Tactically limited, materially costly, operationally risky, yet strategically invaluable. It forced Japan to react. It bought time for the Allies. It reshaped the tempo of the Pacific War. Above all, it demonstrated a truth that would define World War II. Air power was no longer bound by geography. The legacy. Today, the story of the Doolittle Raid lives on not in the wreckage of bombs, but in memory. In museums where B-25s stand silent. In photographs of young men who did not know if they would return. In the idea that courage, paired with ingenuity, can bend the course of history. 16 aircraft. 80 volunteers. One impossible mission. They did not know how the war would end. They did not know who would survive. They only knew that someone had to go first. Closing narration. In war, there are moments when strategy meets desperation, when leaders gamble not for territory, but for belief. On a cold morning in April 1942, that gamble lifted off a carrier deck and disappeared into the unknown. The bombs fell. The planes were lost. But the message endured. The Pacific was no longer an ocean of safety, and the long road to victory had truly begun.